Hello, everyone. And today I want to take a few minutes to share some thoughts on something that has been going on in my mind a lot lately. So, the role of Bitcoin in the current global situation. So, pretty much when you step back and look at what's happening in the world right now, it really feels like we're living through a very unusual moment in economic history. Inflation is still lingering in many economies, growth is slowing down, energy prices are rising again, and on top of that, we're seeing geopolitical tensions, sanctions, and instability across multiple regions. When you combine all these factors together, it starts to resemble a scenario that economists have a very specific word for, and that's stagflation. If you look back through history, periods like this have often led to major shifts in how people protect their wealth. So, the big question I want to explore today is, could Bitcoin eventually take on the role that gold once played during times of economic uncertainty? And to understand why this question matters, we really need to look back at one of the most famous economic periods in modern history, the 1970s. During that decade, the global economy was hit by a series of oil shocks. Energy prices skyrocketed, inflation surged, and economic growth slowed dramatically. It may sound familiar. Back then, investors were facing the same problem many people are thinking about today. How do you protect your wealth when inflation is rising and the economic outlook is uncertain? And during that time, one asset stood out above everything else: gold. Gold became the ultimate safe haven asset. Investors around the world turned to it as a way to protect their purchasing power, and the result was incredible. Between the early 1970s and 1980, the price of gold increased nearly 20 times. It became the financial refuge of that area. But today, as you know, the world is very different, and because for the first time in history, we have something that didn't exist back then. We have Bitcoin. So, to put things into perspective, Bitcoin has a number of characteristics that make it fundamentally different from traditional financial assets. First, its supply is limited. Flat currencies that can be printed by central banks, Bitcoin has a fixed maximum supply of 21 million coins. That scarcity is one of the key reasons many people compare it to digital gold. And then secondly, Bitcoin operates outside of the traditional banking system. You don't need a bank, a government, or some kind of institution to hold or transfer it. The network itself verifies transactions. And then thirdly, and this is extremely important in today's world, Bitcoin is global and borderless. You can send it anywhere in the world in minutes. It doesn't matter if you're in Asia, Europe, the Middle East, or even South America. The network is always running. And finally, Bitcoin is not tied to any single government or political system. And that independence is something that many investors are starting to think about more seriously, especially during periods of this global uncertainty. Interestingly, we are already starting to see signals of how Bitcoin might behave during periods of financial stress. In countries experiencing sanctions, currency instability, or capital controls, cryptocurrencies are increasingly being used as a tool for preserving wealth. There have been many discussions suggesting that in places facing financial restrictions, including countries like Iran, people are turning to Bitcoin as a way to move or store value outside of traditional financial systems. Now, this doesn't mean Bitcoin replaces existing systems overnight, but it does highlight something very important, and that being Bitcoin allows capital to move freely across borders in a way that many traditional assets cannot. And as for gold, gold has historically been the ultimate store of value, but it also has its limitations. Physically, gold is heavy, it's difficult to transport, it can be expensive to store and insure. And during times of crisis, it can actually be very hard to sell quickly. Gold has even traded below its global market price simply because transporting it or finding liquidity becomes difficult. But Bitcoin doesn't have this problem. Bitcoin purely exists on a market. You can move millions of dollars worth of value across the world in minutes with nothing more than an internet connection. From a liquidity and mobility perspective, that's a completely different system. Right now, Bitcoin is widely viewed as a risk asset. And when global markets experience sudden shocks, investors usually react the same way. They sell everything. Stocks fall, commodities fall, crypto falls. And we've seen this happen before during major market stress events. In the short term, the priority for investors becomes liquidity. That means it's entirely possible that before any major new growth phase, the crypto market could go through another significant correction. Some analysts believe areas like 55,000 to 60,000 could potentially act as a major liquidity zone where strong demand appears. If that kind of correction appears, it could necessarily invalidate the long-term thesis. In fact, historically, large bull markets in Bitcoin have often started after major corrections. But as always, here's the part that gets interesting. So imagine a scenario where global markets continue to struggle. Economic growth slows, traditional assets face pressure, but Bitcoin begins to show resilience. If investors start seeing Bitcoin hold its value or even rise during those conditions, the perception of crypto could fundamentally change. Instead of being seen purely as a speculative technology asset, Bitcoin could begin to be viewed as a store of value, something closer to the role that gold played decades ago. If that shift in perception happens, it could become one of the most important turning points in the history of cryptocurrencies, because once investors begin to trust an asset as a store of value, demand can grow exponentially. Now, of course, none of this is guaranteed. Bitcoin is still a young asset compared to traditional markets, and its role in the global financial system is evolving. But what makes this moment fascinating is that we may be witnessing the early stages of much bigger history, a world dealing with inflation, geopolitical uncertainty, and shifting financial systems, while at the same time, a completely new form of digital money is slowly gaining global adoption. Whether Bitcoin eventually becomes the new digital gold or remains to be seen, but the possibility alone makes this one of the most interesting financial experiments of our time. Anyway, those are just my thoughts on a situation. So let me know what you guys think. Could Bitcoin eventually play the role that gold once did? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to click the subscribe button and like the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.